When your own son tells you you're not welcome at his Christmas table, it's not just the words that hurts everything behind them. I was sitting on David's leather sofa, the one I helped pay for, talking about making my famous roast turkey this year, just like Margaret and I used to. Before I could finish, my boy's shoulders tensed. He cleared his throat and said, "Dad, you won't be joining us for Christmas." At first, I thought I'd misheard, but then came the explanation, if you can call it that. Stephanie's parents were flying in from Connecticut. They had their own traditions and preferred a certain atmosphere. The way she said it made it clear my working-class roots. My homestyle cooking, and even the memory of my late wife, didn't fit their picture-perfect holiday. As she spoke, I looked around the room, the polished hardwood floors, paid for with my second mortgage, the custom curtains, charged to my card when she decided the old ones lacked sophistication. Every corner of their home was a monument to my sacrifices. Now I was being told I didn't belong in it. That was the moment something in me shifted. 5 years of financial support, over $200,000 spent, and this was my thank you. Christmas. Or not. I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be treated like the hired help in a house I had built with my own sweat. I drove home that night with the December cold pressing through the windshield, not from the weather outside, but from something heavier sitting in my chest. The roads through Boise's North End were lined with houses glowing in red and gold lights. Inside each, I imagined families laughing over mugs of cocoa, the kind of warm, noisy holiday evenings Margaret and I used to host before she passed. But not this year. This year, I was being told to find somewhere else to be. Back at my place, a modest 2-bedroom with a sagging porch light tie. Didn't even take off my coat. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills and unopened bank statements I'd been avoiding for months. I reached for the calculator and, for the first time in 5 years, forced myself to add it all up. Mortgage payments for David's house, $2,900 a month. That was $34,800 a year. Times 5 years, $174,000. Then there was the $45,000 down payment I'd taken out of my own home equity when they couldn't quite swing it. Add in the kitchen remodel, Stephanie insisted, on granite counters, stainless steel appliances, another $19,000. The grand total stared back at me. Over $238,000. That number hit harder than Stephanie's words. That was my retirement. That was the life insurance Margaret left me. That was supposed to keep me secure in my later years, not bankroll someone else's perfect life. I looked around my own kitchen, an outdated fridge that groaned every time it kicked on, cabinets with peeling veneer, linoleum curling in the corners. My sweater had a hole in the elbow. The truth landed like a punch to the goot I had been. Living like a pauper so they could play royalty in the suburbs. And for what? For a thank you now and then. For a seat at their table once in a while, as long as I kept my head down and my opinions to myself. No, not anymore. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. There, it was automatic transfer scheduled. For the 15th of every month, $2,900 straight to their mortgage company. Without thinking twice, I picked up the phone and called the bank. A young-sounding woman named Jennifer answered. "How can I help you today, Mr. Bennett?" "I want to cancel an automatic transfer," I said. Surprised at how steady my voice was, she tapped at her keyboard. "I see it here, $2,900 monthly to Wells Fargo, ending in 4,812. How long have you been making this payment? 5 years?" The words were bitter in my mouth. "And you'd like to cancel it effective immediately." I glanced around the room, again my chipped coffee mug, the draft seeping through the old window frames, the porch light that hadn't worked in months. All things I could have fixed years ago if I hadn't been bleeding money into someone else's dream. "Yes," I said, "effective immediately." There was a pause, then the sound of keys clicking. "Done. The transfer is canceled. Is there anything else I can help you with?" "No," I said. And I meant it not just about the bank, no more paying for respect I never received, no more keeping the peace by sacrificing myself, no more pretending that financial generosity would somehow buy me a place in a family that didn't value me. When I hung up, the quiet in the house felt different, not empty, but lighter. For the first time in years, I realized next month's budget would balance. I could finally replace that porch light, maybe even take a weekend trip somewhere Margaret had always wanted to go. I poured myself a small glass of the good bourbon. I'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, this was it. I raised my glass toward the faded photograph of Margaret on the mantel. "Merry Christmas to me," I said aloud, and this time I meant it. The morning after I cut off the mortgage payments, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I brewed a fresh pot of good coffee, not the bargain bin grounds I'd been buying to save money, and sat by the window watching the frost melt off the fence. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't calculating how much of my paycheck would vanish in 3 days. At 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. Stephanie's name lit up the screen like a warning flare. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Richard," she said briskly, "I need you to pick up my parents from Boise Airport. Their flight from Hartford gets in at 2 o'clock. Actually laughed. "Did you forget our conversation yesterday?" "This isn't about that," she snapped. "We need to focus on practical matters right now. My parents need transportation, and you're the only one available during the day. That's what family does, Richard. They help each other." Her tone was pure entitlement. Not a request, a command. I thought about telling her no right then and there, but something in me decided silence would be more satisfying. "What airline?" I asked casually. "Alaska Airlines, Flight 447. They'll be at baggage claim 3. And Richard, please wear something decent. That blue shirt you wore to David's graduation." My parents noticed details. She hung up without a thank you at 2:15 p.m. Instead of idling at the airport curb, I was in my favorite recliner, sipping Earl Grey and working the crossword puzzle from yesterday's paper. By 2:47, the first text came through. "Dad, where are you? My parents are waiting." I set the phone face down and turned to the sports section by 3:30. The calls were coming nonstop. Stephanie. An unknown number I assumed was her parents, then Stephanie again. I let them all go to voicemail. Around 5 o'clock, I made myself a grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind of comfort meal Margaret used to make on cold winter nights. Outside, the sun was slipping behind the hills, painting the snow a deep gold. Somewhere across town, the Connecticut royalty were probably arguing about taxi fares in the airport parking garage. The thought made my soup taste even better. Just after 6 o'clock, the pounding started. Not knocking, pounding. Heavy, angry fists shaking my front door. When I opened it, 3 faces glared back at me. Stephanie, her mother Carol, and her father Harold, red-faced and puffed up like he was ready to bark orders at a board meeting. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Harold demanded, storming into my living room without invitation. "We waited over 3 hours at that airport." "This is completely unacceptable," Carol added, her voice dripping with East Coast superiority. "Barbaric behavior from someone your age. My parents had to take a taxi because you decided to out," I said, my voice cutting clean through their noise. They froze. I stepped forward just enough to make my point. "This is my house, and I want you out." "Now," Harold jabbed a finger at my chest. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. I know people, important people. There will be consequences." "Is that a threat, Harold?" I asked quietly. "It's a promise," he said, his face inches from mine. I opened the door. Wide. "Then I guess we'll both see what happens next." "Good night," they filed out, muttering under their breath. The deadbolt clicked behind them, and the house felt cleaner, quieter. But I knew this wasn't over. People like Harold didn't just lick their wounds, they plotted. I didn't have to wait long to see his next move. Asterisk, it was 3 mornings later. When I saw my own face staring back at me from the pages of the Idaho Statesman, page 3, bottom half an old headshot from my business website, probably 10 years outdated, the headline stopped me cold. "Boise man abandons elderly couple." At airport during holiday storm, I set down my coffee, reading slowly, every word feeling like a shove between the ribs. According to the article, Harold and Carol Whitmore, Stephanie's parents, had been left stranded at the airport for over 4 hours in dangerous winter weather after I failed to appear for a pre-arranged pickup. Holiday storm. It had been 50 degrees and sunny that afternoon. The danger was having to find a taxi like every other traveler. But the piece painted me as some unstable, heartless relative who had suddenly snapped no mention of the Christmas ban, no mention of 5 years of mortgage payments, no mention of the hundreds of thousands I'd poured into their lives. The quotes were pure performance. "At our age, this kind of treatment isn't just inconsiderate, it's dangerous," Harold had said. Carol added that they'd been worried for Richard's mental state, given my recent erratic behavior. I could almost hear their smug voices in print. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just payback for the airport. Harold was playing the long game. He was using his East Coast business connections to tarnish my name in my own city. Boise's a big town to outsiders, but to those of us who've lived here decades, it's a village. Reputation matters. One article like this could undo a lifetime of trust. I folded the paper carefully, set it aside, and stared out the kitchen window. The easy thing would have been to stew about it, complain to a few friends, maybe write a letter to the editor that no one would read. But I didn't build a business from nothing by doing the easy thing. They wanted a war. I'd give them one. Pulled out my laptop and began with the basics. Google searches for Harold Whitmore, Carol Whitmore, Stephanie Whitmore, Bennett, and yes, even my own son David. Public profiles, social media posts, charity event, photos of it was there, gift-wrapped by their own vanity. Vacation shots in the Caribbean during months I'd covered their overdue property taxes. Instagram posts bragging about our gorgeous kitchen remodel with the very granite countertops I'd paid for. Facebook check-ins at five-star restaurants while I was eating canned soup to make their mortgage. By the time I was done, I had a digital file thick enough to make any lawyer salivate. But I wasn't taking this to court. No, this was going to be settled where they'd least expect it. I knew from Stephanie's online event posts that she and David were hosting Christmas dinner in a week. 14 guests, neighbors, friends, and members of her parents' social circle. The very people who read The Statesman and likely already had an opinion about me based on Harold's planted hit piece. Perfect. If they wanted to tell the public, I was a selfish, unstable old man. I'd show that same public exactly how much of their perfect life had been built with my money. I started printing 5 years of bank statements, every $2,900 mortgage payment highlighted in yellow, receipts for the $45,000 down payment, the $19,000 kitchen remodel invoice, photos of their new landscaping, their custom furniture, their holiday decorations, all tied to dates and payments. Then I printed the Statesman article and marked it, up with my notes in red ink, false next to holiday storm, missing context next to prearranged pickup, and defamation beside their little performance about my mental state. When the stack was complete, I made 14 identical packets, one for every seat at their Christmas table. It was no longer about being invited to Christmas. It was about telling the truth to the people who mattered most to them, their audience. This was no longer a quiet family dispute. This was chess, and I'd just moved my queen into position. For the next 3 days, my living room looked less like a home and more like a war room. The coffee table was buried under printed statements, receipts, and photographs. My laptop sat open, tabs lined up like ammunition, social media profiles, archived real estate listings, even old charity newsletters with Harold and Carol's names in bold print. I worked like a man with a purpose, because every document told the same story. Years of me quietly funding the life they bragged about to their friends, while they painted me as some pitiful old man. On one side of the table, I laid out the financial backbone of their so-called success, $45,000. From my home equity for their down payment, $174,000 in mortgage payments over 5 years, $19,000 for the kitchen remodel Stephanie couldn't live without, thousands more for landscaping, new furniture, property taxes, and utilities, when they were tight on cash. On the other side, I stacked evidence of their arrogance: Instagram shots of Caribbean cruises, wine tastings in Napa, holiday parties in their granite counter kitchen, and smug captions like "blessed beyond measure," all of it paid for by me, the final touch. 14 crisp manila folders, each holding a complete set of evidence, one for every person at their Christmas dinner. I wanted no whispers, no he said, she said. When those packets hit the table, there'd be nothing to argue with, just cold, hard proof. I didn't stop there. I printed the Idaho Statesman article in full, my red pen slicing through their lies. Holiday Storm got a big false in the margin. Concern for my mental state got a note reading, "Psychological projection from those who've never worked an honest day in their lives." I knew exactly when and where I'd deliver it. Stephanie's Facebook event page, because she couldn't help broadcasting her every move listed Christmas Eve. Dinner starting at 6 p.m., I'd arrive late enough that the main course would be on the table, but early enough to ensure no one could slip away without hearing me out, and I wasn't going in like some bitter old man crashing a party. I'd dress sharp, my best navy suit, polished shoes, tie knotted perfectly. Margaret always said you fight your hardest battles looking like you've already won. While I worked, I thought about what this really was. It wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about reclaiming my dignity after years of being treated like a walking checkbook, about showing my son what real backbone looked like, even if it came too late to fix what we'd lost. By the afternoon of December 24th, everything was ready. The evidence packets sat neatly in my leather briefcase. The suit hung pressed on the back of my bedroom door. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, the kind of Idaho winter evening that carried sound like crystal. I poured myself one last cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching the light fade. Somewhere across town, Stephanie and David were playing. The gracious hosts in the house I'd helped buy, surrounded by people who had no idea that their perfect holiday tableau was built on someone else's sacrifice. That was about to change. I wasn't going to sit alone in my house, swallowing another insult in silence this year. I was bringing my own kind of Christmas gift truth, wrapped in 14 manila envelopes, and once those envelopes were opened, there'd be no way to put the wrapping back on dot by 6:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I was parked across the street from their house in the West Boise suburbs. The place glowed like a magazine cover, light icicle lights outlining the roof, a 12-foot Christmas tree visible through the bay window, and the sound of laughter spilling into the cold night air. I stepped out of my truck, briefcase in hand, the winter air biting at my cheeks. My suit was pressed, my shoes shined, and my resolve solid as concrete. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. The front door, of course, was unlocked. Stephanie liked to brag about how safe her neighborhood was, as if good lighting and manicured lawns kept out trouble. I stepped inside quietly, letting the warmth and smell of roasted ham wash over me from the dining room. I heard a voice carol saying, "In our family, we don't do things that way," followed by polite laughter. My hands tightened on the briefcase handle. Your family, I thought, after all I've done for you. I rounded the corner, and 14 faces turned toward me. Stephanie froze, mid-sip of wine. David's face drained of color. Harold's jaw tightened. Good evening, everyone, I said. Evenly, I hope you don't mind me joining you. Richard, Stephanie stammered, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave. Not yet, I replied, setting my briefcase on the marble sideboard. First, I think your guests deserve to know the truth about this dinner, this house, and the people hosting it. A woman I didn't recognize, pearls around her neck, leaned forward. What's this about? Without answering, I opened the briefcase and began moving around the table, placing a packet in front of each guest. These are bank statements, receipts, and records of financial support, I explained. Over $238,000 I've contributed over the last 5 years to keep this house and the people in it afloat. The only sounds were the rustle of paper and the clink of silverware being set down. I saw eyes widening as pages flipped down. Payments, mortgage transfers, kitchen remodel invoices, all in black and white dots. Stephanie tried to recover. He volunteered to help us. We never actually, I cut in, pulling the Idaho Statesman article from my briefcase. You did. Ask for help. And then you rewarded me by planting this. I laid copies of the newspaper story on the table. My red notes, scrawled in the margins. False, omitted context. Fabricated weather conditions. Carol's cheeks flushed. That's exactly what it is, I said. Your father-in-law used his connections to spread lies about me. Lies your friends here have probably already read. A man in a cashmere sweater looked up. Harold, was it really 50 degrees that day? I smiled thinly. Yes, no storm, no danger. Just a calculated smear to make me look like the kind of man who abandons people in need. Pearl necklace turned to Stephanie. You told us your parents were stranded in bad weather. That's why we sent the church group over casseroles. David's voice finally broke through the tension. Dad, I didn't know about the article. Your wife did, I said evenly, and her parents orchestrated it, all while taking my money every month and mocking my background when I wasn't in the room. The air in that dining room changed. Conversations shifted from shock to accusation questions. fired at Harold and Carol from people who'd clearly thought of them as upright citizens. Stephanie stood abruptly, her hostess' smile gone. "This is a family matter, and no," I said firmly. "This stopped being a family matter the moment you made it public." I closed my briefcase. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's the last one I'll ever pay for." As I walked toward the door, voices erupted behind me, sharp, angry, and aimed squarely at the people still seated at that table. I stepped into the cold, and for the first time in years, I felt warm from the inside out. By New Year's Day, the shock waves from that Christmas Eve dinner had rippled through nearly every corner of Boise's country club set. You could feel it in the way people talked quietly, with lowered voices, or avoided talking at all. When Harold and Carol's names came up, the Whitmores had spent years curating a spotless image. Harold, the retired banking executive with deep connections, and Carol, the sophisticated hostess known for her charity luncheons. But now, thanks to a stack of bank statements and one very public shaming, that image had cracked like ice underfoot. Invitations dried up almost overnight. Harold's usual table at the club was suddenly reserved for other members. Carol's wine group stopped meeting at her house. Even the church ladies, polite as they were, started bringing their casseroles somewhere else. And then there was David and Stephanie's home, the house my morning had helped them buy. Without the mortgage payments I'd been making, their finances began to buckle almost immediately. At first, they tried to keep up appearances. Stephanie's social media stayed full of artfully lit photos, posts from chain restaurants dressed up to look more expensive than they were, cropped shots that didn't show the for sale signs creeping into their neighborhood. But reality has a way of catching up. By early March, the cracks were impossible to hide. The letter came to my house by accident, wrong address from the mortgage company. I knew what it was before I opened it. Notice of default. 3 months of missed payments. Over $8,000 past due. 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure. I set it on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee. Reading it the way you read the weather report for a storm hundreds of miles away, interesting, but not my problem anymore. The phone calls started soon after. At first from Stephanie, her voice tight and brittle, always going straight to voicemail. Then from Harold, who'd apparently decided to try his "we're both reasonable men" act. Finally, from David himself. I didn't pick up for any of them. It wasn't spitude. It was peace. And I wasn't ready to give it up. I heard from a mutual friend at the hardware store that Harold had taken to complaining about me in public, painting himself as the wronged party. But the problem with telling lies is that eventually the truth gets louder, especially when 14 dinner guests have the receipts. The foreclosure notice wasn't the only thing they were losing. Harold's name had quietly been removed from the treasurer's spot at the Business Leaders Association. Carol's beloved charity board found a fresh face to chair their spring gala, and Stephanie, well, she'd stopped posting altogether. Knew what was coming next. Pride might have kept them away for a while, but desperation would drive someone to my door. Sure enough, on a Thursday evening in late March, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, David stood there, shoulders slumped, suit wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. The confident young man who had told me I wouldn't be welcome at Christmas was gone. What stood there now was a man stripped down to reality, carrying the weight of choices made to icily and too often at my expense. "Dad," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him in, the smell of the coffee I'd just brewed drifting between us. As he glanced around my freshly painted living room, the one I could finally afford to fix, he probably realized just how far I'd come in the months since I stopped paying for his life. And in that moment, I knew the fallout from that night wasn't over. The house of cards they'd built was collapsing, and I had no intention of holding it up again. David sat on the edge of my couch like a man afraid to get too comfortable. I took my time pouring him a cup of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes silence forces the truth out faster than questions. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, his voice low, "for Christmas. For the article, for letting Stephanie and her parents treat you the way they did." I leaned back in my chair, watching him. "Go on. I didn't know Harold planted that story in the paper, but I should have guessed. I should have defended you years ago. Instead, I let them." His voice cracked. "I let them turn me against my own father." Hearing it out loud didn't feel like vindication. It felt like loss. Loss of 5 years we could have spent as father and son instead of financier and dependent. The house is in foreclosure, he admitted, rubbing his temples. We can't make the payments without. He stopped short, realizing the words, without. My help, I finished for him. He nodded, shame written all over his face. I met his eyes. Do you know exactly how much I gave you over those 5 years? He hesitated. Over $200,000. $238,468, I said. I know the exact figure because I finally added it up. His shoulders sagged. Dad, I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, I said. The money's gone. But more importantly, those years are gone, and I'm not buying them back. He stared into his coffee for a long time before speaking again. Is there any chance you could forgive me? I forgave you months ago, I said, and meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. If you want a relationship with me now, you'll have to build it from scratch. On respect, not on my checkbook. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. I understand. As for your house, I continued, that's not my problem anymore. You're a grown man. You can sell it, get something you can actually afford, or get a job that covers your bills. But you're going to have to live within your means, David. No more pretending to be someone you're not. For the first time all evening, his back straightened. You're right, he said quietly, about all of it. He stood, heading for the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, seeing you stand up for yourself at Christmas, I was embarrassed and angry, but I was proud too. I gave a small smile. Maybe there's hope for you yet. When the door closed, I poured myself a glass of the good bourbon and stepped onto the back porch. Spring was working its way into Boise, air soft, the trees just starting to bud. In a few months, I'd turned 63. Margaret had been gone 8 years. I'd wasted 5 of them funding people who didn't respect me. Not anymore. Family isn't about blood or shared last names. It's about respect, reciprocity, and being wanted for who you are, not what you can give. You can't buy love with money, and you can't earn respect from people determined not to give it. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to stop enabling bad behavior and let the consequences fall where they may. If this story struck a chord with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a line with family or friends who took advantage of you? And if you believe in standing up for your dignity, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this one. Your voice matters here, and so does your story.